Welcome to Retained Search, the podcast, where we lift the lid on what it's really like to work retained, discuss the stories we've gathered along the way, and give you all a peek behind the scenes of our amazing community and how they're getting ahead. Okay, welcome everybody to today's episode of the Retained Search show. I'm so excited to have two guys I'm very much looking forward to talking to, Hishem Azzouz and Chris Moylan. And for the first time, I'm going to step out of the host's seat and I'm going to let a very experienced host look after you today. Welcome, Hish. It's so nice to have you here.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. Love the idea when I saw it. So appreciate the opportunity to get involved. And I'm really looking forward to this. I think it's a really important, interesting conversation around contingent versus retained. So yeah. I guess my goal here, if I'm honest, is just to try and help both of you like really talk about this model that you're both passionate about and really see both perspectives and maybe chuck a couple of curveball questions at both of you maybe. And obviously hopefully have some fun, but trying to act as the sort of middle person here that can see both perspectives, because I've met plenty of recruiters that have been successful retained, plenty of recruiters that have been successful contingent. Let's talk about it, ultimately, is the goal. Yes. So I guess you sort of helped come up with a bit of a structure as how we're going to do this, right? So we'll do a bit of an intro, but then you've called it rounds, as if it's like some sort of boxing match. So I guess the audience will have to decide on the scorecard if we get to that, unless someone gets knocked out in one of the rounds. But we've got round one, client fit, and talking about when is certain model right for the client and thinking about it from that perspective. We'll talk about it from a financial perspective, the risk, what's more sustainable, different stuff around that, the client and candidate experience, and then we're going to sort of flip the script and I'm going to hear Lou talk about contingent, which I don't think I ever have, and talk about if she was to start working on a contingent basis, how would she go about it, and then likewise for Chris on retained, and then we'll sort of wrap up there, but along the way I might chuck some curveball questions at both of you. So let's just start with a bit of an intro, really. I guess, Lou, I'll come to you first. I guess introduce yourself, your model. Obviously, people here will probably know who you are, but I guess also we've added in there, like what types of roles and markets or clients do you see in your clients that they work with where you really feel like the retain model suits best and works best? And then talk to us a bit about why are you so passionate about this? I mean, this is your whole business. All these years that I've known you, it's all about this mission of getting more people to work retain. So let's start there, and then Chris, I'll come to you.
Okay, yeah. So, well, I'm Louise Archer. I guess most people listening to this might have seen me hanging around LinkedIn because I have a habit of doing that quite a lot, and various other different places, YouTube and podcast as well, as you know. The model that I learnt about, 10 years ago now, is a retained model. Previously, I had worked contingently for 13 years, so I had plenty of experience of that. But I'd say my model now is firmly the retained search model, which basically is where some financial commitment from the client enables the recruiter or us to put in place a rigorous and robust process and commit to making sure that we can reach a result, and not just any result, but the best result available to us all in the market at this time. And in terms of the clients and the market that it excels with, I find that it excels best where the contingent model doesn't perform particularly well. So that's often where it's a really niche or tricky or sought after skill set, or it's a series of multiple hires where one or two is easier, but when we get into 3, 4, 5, 6, it starts to get much harder, or where it's confidential or senior or critical, all those sort of situations. The clients, it's a mixture. Some big, some small, doesn't really matter on location or industry. It's more associated with the specific situation. And I chose it for me because I got to the point where I knew I could deliver a great service, but I didn't always have the environment in which to be able to do that, i.e. the client working with other agencies or being at risk of them pulling the job, which meant I couldn't work as thoroughly and as rigorously as I wanted to because I was working at risk. So I chose the retain model because it enables me to deliver the service and perform to my maximum capabilities.
Love it. Chris, over to you, mate. Introduce yourself. What's your world? And like, you've worked in a few different markets, I know, but yeah, tell us a bit about your markets. If you've typically always done contingent and why that's been the way that you've worked with a lot of companies. Just tell us a bit about that and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm Chris Moylan. I'm co-founder and director of TechLink Partners, which is my business currently, which is a technology staffing company, which is operating throughout Europe and the USA. I've been in the staffing and recruiting sector now for 13 years. Started out in tech. I've also done engineering and construction. Had a business prior to this one, which I exited, and largely always been contingent, throughout my career. So for me, retained is we've done a few, but it's the opposite side of the fence, right? It's
Who hasn't done a few retainers? That's always the answer, isn't it? Who hasn't done a few?
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we? It may sound like really basic, right? But I do actually think if we're having this conversation, let's just all make sure we're on the same page. So, like, Chris, when you say contingent, like, just define that for us. This may seem basic, but let's just all make sure, like, anyone listening, we all agree, because some people say they do certain things and it may be a bit different. So, like, when you say you've always worked contingent, tell us what you mean by that. Like, how does that define it?
Yeah, so typically we don't take money up front from the client before we start conducting a search. So, when I've worked in environments previously, I've seen other people do retained. I guess, look, part of that will be that I started out as a contract biller. I've been a contract biller for a large part of my career, mainly bolted perm in when I become a business owner. I never really dual desked when I wasn't a business owner. Saw the value in perm when I launched a business. And
Okay.
for me, when I've seen retained done, I imagine, look, will enlighten us, but typically it's like 33% up front, 33% on a short list. And I've never fully understood those numbers, to be honest, because then I'm like, where's the other 1% go, right? But and then the rest when it's done. So I've typically worked where we'll take on a project or a job brief and we get paid when the job's done.
When the job's done. Okay. So that's typically how you've done it, right? And then I know it really vary, but for the most part, does that also mean that you're up against other agencies or no?
Yeah, so we're big on new business. So if we create a job or create an opportunity or a need within a customer, obviously we'll always pitch for exclusive. But if we're late to the party, i.e. we've heard a company has a requirement, they have a project, they're building a new service or practice, and we want to get in, what I find is, in some cases we'll be late to the party, but we're selling on our network, and then our plan is to then go and outperform the people and get a foot in the door. And then that's how we've opened up and won all of our clients, if I'm being honest.
Okay.
All of the clients in my career, I've won that pretty much that way.
So it might start that way, but then can end up working where like you're the sole supplier, but there's no. Okay.
Yeah, correct.
All right. And then Lou, should we? Because again, people can do this in different ways, right? Chris had just said there a very typical way. I've heard it be described in a different way, but for the most part, retained. How are you defining that for everyone when you work with people?
And you're right, it can be different. And I suppose, and the payment model, most people see retained, or when you ask people what retained is, they immediately say it's money up front. But actually, it's not. It's the process of delivery, which carries a different payment structure. So it's actually a different way of delivering against a requirement. And it needs some financial commitment from the client to enable that process to be put in place. But in a nutshell, there is a difference in payment model. And the main difference is that a portion of the fee is paid on commencement of the assignment. And that might be that there's then another portion paid on agreement of shortlist and then another on completion, or after 90 days if some people will charge again after, successful completion of the probation period. So the payment model can be flexible, but the fundamental of the payment model is there's some financial commitment at the start on commencement of the project. Yes. But for me, that's not the main difference between retained and contingent. The main difference is the process that you apply to execute the project.
Yeah. But a lot of people would say, like what Chris has said, right, in terms of how do I describe it? Okay.
Yeah, almost everyone,
Yeah, right. So let's just get into a couple of bits here then. So firstly, what I'd be interested, Lou, I'll come to you first. Like what would just be interesting to hear firstly would be, because you've got the perspective of one, doing it yourself, but now you've coached a lot of people, right? So you've also got that lens. So let's just start firstly with, where do you feel like the retained model, being honest, where does it not work well?
Yeah, it doesn't work well in quite a few situations, and in particular it doesn't work well where the contingent model works really well. Your low level, easy to fill, high volume, plentiful talent available. You can stick an advert on, field a response, fire a few CVs over, client picks one, happy days. The retained model doesn't work well there, because why should they change the model that's working really well? So not that it would work very well, but there's no need for it. It's not necessary. So I don't believe it's necessary in all situations. Equally, where there's a fixed idea of what they're looking for with no willingness or desire to flex any parameters, and what the client's looking for doesn't exist. Like, we can't manufacture people or pull rabbits out of hats that just don't exist. So where there's an agreement to want to seek the best result that's available, then the retained model works. Equally, where there isn't a desire to seek the best result available, where there's a simple, I want something that doesn't exist, then it doesn't work particularly well in that situation either.
Okay. And then Chris, same question to you, like where from your journey, mate, and how, you can draw it from wherever, but where have you found from your perspective the contingent model, contingent way of working, where has that not worked well in your experience?
I think what Lou said, because it would be the exact same. So if we're doing real high level stuff, right, and we're up against, if let's say we're fishing in waters where it's traditionally executive search, maybe it's like we're in tech, right? So maybe it's a global CIO position, huge salary, and you've heard of this and you're knocking on the door, but somebody's already retained. So let's see how they get on. There's that, but then also on the flip side of what Lou said is, my old business was a engineering and construction business. It was high volume. The contract stuff was no interview. You just send people to projects and they work. And then even the perm stuff, you just didn't really get a lot of wind in that construction market, because they want the best possible result for the cheapest possible price, and they only want to pay when they've got a candidate. So I guess to answer the question, I would say, the challenges with contingent can be real high level stuff. And then, just if we're going up against what you would call executive search, real sort of high level or real niche permanent stuff, I don't really see it's a challenging contract, because people aren't typically retaining people on contract unless I'm missing the trick.
I don't think so. No, I haven't. And
just on this
contract as well, by the way.
I was just going to say, just to add, because Chris has mentioned it a few times, and I think that will help all of us. So a lot of the people that you coach, Lou, is it a real mixed bag in terms of they work contract, perm? Like, do you know what I mean? Because I feel like that's going to be slightly, I don't know, you tell me, like, then are we getting into the category of like statement of work, different? I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm ex-contract. So I started in temps, in secretarial temps actually, and then moved into like engineering contracts. So all the work I did in the US with ExxonMobil in particular was all contractors. I moved into perm like you, Chris, kind of later on in my career. I did a bit of it earlier and then moved back into it. So I'm familiar with the differences, and was quite resistant, I think, to move away from contract because I like the pace of it. But I haven't seen retained outside of statement of works or master service agreements or enterprise frame agreements, on one-off pieces of work, I haven't seen retained done on a contract basis. I haven't done it. I don't have expertise in that area. I don't know anyone that does. It's much more common for direct hire or permanent work, the retain model, unless you're providing staff contractors to a business on a project.
Okay. So like just on this then, like just curious to get your take on this, Lou. Is your typical advice then that you encourage people to reject working contingent outright? Like if they're committed to working on a retained basis with their clients, can I say in the same breath, yes, Mr. or Mrs. Client, we also have this other service called whatever, and you pay on success, or we can work together on this in this retained way. This is what it involves. Like, is that the advice here for the clients?
Kind of, but in a slightly different way. Kind of.
Okay.
So, in the same way that my experience is that the contingent model works quite well in some situations, but in other situations it falls over. That's the way I tend to explain it to clients. So I will explain to them that we work in different ways depending on the circumstances, right? So where it's low level, easy to fill, where the contingent model is working well, we're quite happy working on that basis. However, in lots of situations, for whatever reason, it doesn't work particularly well. And it might be that it's niche or it's challenging location or it's a bit more senior, or for whatever reason the contingent model's fallen over. Then instead we apply a more rigorous methodology. And that's where some financial commitment from you enables me to put in a more robust process and commit to producing a result. So yes, I always give them the explanation that there are different ways of working depending on the circumstances.
Okay. Because I'll be honest, when I speak to people that have worked retained for a good amount of time, I do often hear them say that it's like you can't in the same breath you can't offer retained and contingent. It sort of decredits that way of working.
Kind of, but it's not an offer, and this is where like the nuance is. I'm not offering retained, I'm prescribing it. Okay. So in the same way that if the contingent model is working well for them, I'll say, carry on doing that. For me, I, on this type of position, would want to operate on a retained basis. But if the contingent model is working well, you should carry on doing it.
Okay.
It's then my choice whether I want to work on it on a contingent basis or not, but I wouldn't. But in the same breath, I would say, but what you've said to me is that you're frustrated that you're not getting the quality and the quantity or the candidate, and that's why we're having this conversation in the first place. So it doesn't make sense for me to put the same model in place. So in these situations, we always apply a retained methodology. Okay. And therefore, we're able to deliver a different outcome. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it isn't that I'm offering it, it's that I'm explaining it doesn't make sense for them to go down that route because they've already told me that they're not getting what they want using that model. Yeah?
Yeah. No, that makes sense. To be honest, I was going to ask a similar thing. Like, would you encourage, I mean, as someone who's been a contract biller sort of through and through and then done perm as a business owner, I've got other people to do perm, just sort of playing devil's advocate. Like if you're on the sales floor and you've got somebody doing perm, it's interesting. So would you tell that person if they come to you and say, right, I've got a client here, they're tech or they're life sciences or they're finance, got a real senior role, they're happy to work with us, they're happy to agree fees or whatever, and they've pitched a retainer and they're not interested, would you be encouraging that person to not work with that client? And then equally, appreciate it's like a double barrel question, but are you happy to take on a retainer with a client that's already gone out to market and had 2 or 3 agencies going through the market, speaking to lots of candidates? Because then you've also got the challenge that you get with some organizations where you're now going to be retained going out to market and potentially introducing candidates that have already been contacted or are in a process, so are you telling them, one, to turn that down, and then secondly, how are you overcoming that challenge?
Yeah, okay, both really good questions. So the first one, if they've rejected the retainer, would I then go and work on it with contingent, or would I encourage someone to? It depends on what the diagnosis has yielded first. So if the client has been using a contingent model in the past for this sort of position and it's working really well, and I'm then trying to push them down a retained route and they reject it, then I'd probably tell them to just carry on doing what they're doing and leave it alone and go and find a client that is having a problem, to be honest, because it sounds like they're getting what they need from the current model anyway, or their current suppliers. Doesn't make sense for us to add more into the mix and muddy the waters and risk duplication and a messy process and so on. But if the diagnosis is yielded that actually they're not getting the candidates that they want, or they're not getting them when they want them, or it's not a particularly enjoyable process, then I would say it doesn't make sense for them to carry on using the same model. So if they've done that diagnosis and found out that the contingent model isn't yielding results and explained why this is a sensible route to go down, and the client has still said, no, I don't want to do it, then I just want to know, like, why. That's fine, that's not a problem, but what is it that, is stopping you? Because sometimes it's just because they've got a perception of retained where, I don't know, you're just going to take some money up front and then leave me high and dry, or we've done it before and someone did that, for example, in which case I want to try and overcome some of those worries. And if all of those things have been done and it's logical, it makes sense for them to do it, the contingent model isn't working, I've overcome their worries on price and running away with their money and all that kind of stuff, and they still say no, then again, I'm thinking, they've got a problem. It's not being solved by the contingent model. I've given them a straightforward solution, which is low risk. I've de-risked it for them, and they're still saying no. Why not? Like, why don't they want to commit? Normally, I find if a client doesn't want to pay a retainer in that situation, it's because they've got something else going on. Like they've got like a candidate in the wings, or they've got and sometimes it's then that they go, well, actually, we've got somebody at second interview and we just wanted someone to benchmark against. And I would have found out then finally that actually it would have been a waste of my time sending CVs in because they've probably got their front runner already. So I'm glad that they've said no. So sometimes a no is actually a win. Yeah,
because I guess your team are then sort of saving their time. So I think it's just a mindset shift, isn't it? What I
almost
find
like a qualifier. It's like you take them through that, and then it makes you realise how serious they are and how much they do need you or not. And if they're just kind of like, well, I'll just have some extra CVs, in which case it's up to me. Would I say to the guy, do you want to send some CVs? Yeah, if you've got somebody handy, yeah, but don't spend too much time on it. Like, that was going to be my next question. Like, if you've got somebody and like retained your thing, and you only do retained, and then it turns out let's say they've got a niche and they know they've got a great network in a niche, and they've got somebody, client's not interested in retained, but you've got somebody who hasn't been contacted, they'll do the job. Are you still encouraging your team? Yeah,
okay,
definitely.
In this case, send that person.
Yeah, definitely, because what I find is those two activities, the retain model and the spec model, which is the BD model, which works so beautifully in contingent, also works really well for generating retained work. So you carry out a retainer, that generates candidates that you now know are looking, but aren't suitable for the project that you're currently working on, right? Because for whatever reason, they're then the perfect candidates to spec into that sort of opportunity, which we call often like an opportunistic hire. We're not actually spending time working on it, but we're, hoping that there's a fit. We're just going to drop that in and see if that's a fit. That would be a great moment to make an opportunistic hire, which sometimes then turns into the client going, yeah, that's a good candidate and we do need some help on this, but our current suppliers aren't yielding a result, in which case we can then pitch retained. So the two things go hand in hand. What we don't do, or what I wouldn't suggest my team do, is spend time actively working on positions where we don't have a financial commitment from a client. So we're either working with financial commitment, or we're speculatively introducing people without investing a huge amount of time and energy.
Just on that, just on the business development tactics. So let's say you do spec somebody in, and the client says, "Great, we're interested in this person," and you say, "Retain us, retain search," and he says, "But you've already." I
probably wouldn't do that.
Yeah. I was just trying to understand that. I guess you're just going to do a contingent deal there, demonstrate your value.
Not necessarily. Maybe if it's as simple as that, if they go, yeah, I want to hire them, great, happy days. I'll take the fee tomorrow. But always I'll ask the question, because my experience of specs, and I've done a lot of it, is that quite often they don't hire the person that you spec in. And what it actually does is just open up a need that isn't quite right. Or they'll meet that person and go, oh, they're nice, but they're good, but they're not quite right for this. So, or they meet that person and then go, actually, they're quite good, but I think we want to see some more to benchmark against. And then it's like, fucking hell, like, I've just sent you the unicorn and you told me you want some more. And so what I would normally do in that situation is, before I let them meet that candidate, is find out, like, what are we trying to achieve here? Because if you meet this candidate and then you haven't seen anybody else, you might then want others to compare them to. And then we might lose this person, more than likely. And then we're back to square one again. So do you want me to bring other people to the table for comparison? In which case, yes, I need some financial commitment to be able to do that, but that'll be deducted from any fee that you pay. And we'll be committed to working with you to reach a result either way. And in the meantime, meet this guy. If you want to hire him, happy days, just the remainder will be charged. But if you don't want to hire him, you've then got a shortlist to default to.
Well, okay, yeah, makes
so
sense.
You can either turn it into a retainer or go ahead and interview him. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, no worries. And if you want to then launch a project after that, no problem.
So just to run this out then. So just curious, Lou, like, from the advice that you give, because I've interviewed a lot of people that end up winning some of their best customers this one, and it was also just coming back to what Chris asked. So I know this is nuanced and we're sort of role playing here and giving scenarios, but I guess these are scenarios that maybe people run into. So putting aside for a second that you get in front of a client and they haven't exhausted this job with loads of different agencies, all these types of things, that isn't the case. It's a target account. You get in front of them and they've had really bad experiences in the past with retained, or they've never worked that way. But you've pitched that and they've gone, you know what, Chris, like, we never worked that way. We don't feel really comfortable. We really like you. We buy into you and we want to work together. But actually, on this vacancy or vacancies, we want to work on a contingent model. And Chris has got a decision to make there, where he's got to decide, is he going to work with them or not? Or is he going to stick to, like, no, I need some financial commitment? If that's the premise, and maybe you might have had a conversation that, okay, well, normally I do work retained, but on this occasion, you're a company that, you know, I really want to work with. I believe I can really do a good job here. On the next position or positions, this is sort of the way that I want us to work. Like, are you advising against that? Because do you know what I mean? So, like, so would you say, you know what, if you've pitched it and they've gone, no, we want to work contingent, what's the advice there? Is it go and do that, deliver, and then you've got an even better chance to upsell, or no?
There's a few different routes you can go down. The first route, I would say, it depends what their worry is, what their barrier is. Like, it depends what comes out of the why not, you know. Okay. So I want to know what's the worry here. Sometimes it's like, you know, we've done it before, like you say, we've been burned, it's not been a good experience, in which case I'd say I understand that completely. That does happen quite a lot, sadly. So for that reason, I want to work on this basis. I don't normally do it, but I'll work on a reimbursable basis. So for the first 2 weeks, so that if after the first 2 weeks we're not getting the results that you want to see and you don't believe we're going to reach a result, I'll stop the search and I'll reimburse the retainer. I don't normally do that, but for this project I will.
Right.
So that makes it a bit easier for them. Does that make you feel more comfortable? This is how we'll set it up. We'll start, we'll have a review after the first week. If you're happy, we'll continue. We'll have a review after the second week. If after the second week you don't want to continue, we'll stop and we'll reimburse the retainer. Now, that's quite a nice way to move the first project over the line, where we can then get the opportunity to demonstrate the difference in process, the difference in result, the difference in outcome. And that's the way I've converted lots of clients.
Okay. So a full refund for the first 2 weeks?
Only for the first 2 weeks, though.
Okay.
And normally what happens is after the first week, when you're doing the first week steering call, where you're showing your process, you're showing the candidates you've identified, who you've approached, what they've said, who's interested, who's not, why they're not interested. You're sharing the data you've collected on comp details. You've done the briefing session around functional behavioural competencies. You've set the parameters for the search. You've set the timeline. You can see when they can see when you're going to shortlist it. That's within reaching distance in a couple of weeks' time. They go, I say, do you want me to continue or not? And they say, yeah, I want you to continue. Great. It's now non-reimbursable from now on. Okay, cool. We're committed to working with you.
So it sounds like the advice is then you basically tell people, like, you should still get financial commitment then versus work contingent.
Well,
you could do all those things
sometimes they say no to that. You know, they might go, no, I don't want to do that. You know, In which case I'd say, look, I really want to work with you. I don't want this to be a barrier, but at the same time, at the moment, I'm working totally at risk. So if at any point you say stop, I might have done 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks of work, and yet you go, oh, see you later, don't really need you anymore, and I'm high and dry. Like, and actually, if this is an existing or incumbent client, I can reference maybe that happened before. Like, that's happened to me several times. I can't commercially put myself in that position or keep putting myself in that position. So maybe on this occasion, what we can do is look to waive the retainer in this instance, but charge a cancellation fee if you cancel the project. Just to give me some level of protection with this is a difficult assignment, it's a critical role. You've already experienced the contingent model isn't yielding the results that you're looking for. It's going to take me a lot of time and energy and effort to reach a result here. So I'm going to need some kind of protection to make sure that we do reach that result. And that's when I'd put maybe a cancellation clause in. And if after all that they just say, no, I don't want to do it, I'd probably say, worst case, if you still didn't want to let go of this client, like I'd start to wonder why. Like why, if that won't even suit them, does that mean they actually really want to get out so they can cancel the project? In which case, I don't know whether I want to work on it. Because that looks high risk to me, and I've got other stuff that I'd rather spend my time on. But worst case, okay, we'll work on it for 2 weeks or 3 weeks tops. We know, look at all the stats on contingent, that the chances of filling it go down, don't they? The longer it goes on, it's like it goes down to like 5% or something after 3 weeks. If you haven't found the candidate within 3 or 4 weeks, it goes down to next to nothing. So apply that and say, we'll work on it for this amount of time contingent. If we don't reach the result in that, it's either we then switch to retainer or we don't, we stop. And that would limit my commercial risk, basically, of spending time on something that doesn't result in a fee.
Are you enjoying this so far? Don't miss a single episode. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can be part of the conversation that's shaping the future of recruitment. So we dive really deep into the strategies, the stories, and the truth about retained search. So if you want to hear more about it, or you know someone else that needs to hear this, then share it with them. Right, let's get back to the good stuff.
So I think this brings it. I want to move this on to the other topics, but
yeah,
let's sort of run this out, because I think I was looking at the comments and stuff when you posted, and I think this sort of ties in quite nicely, where a lot of people were just saying there's no debate to be had. It's what's right for the client or what's right for the customer.
Yeah.
And this has come up quite a lot, because that's where my mind just went when you was explaining that, where so for example, I interviewed someone recently, really successful biller, always worked contingent, and has had retained training, and just thought, basically, why would I do that? It's working fine. I don't need to do that. I don't get it. But the biggest blocker was they were viewing it from the lens of them versus what's in it for the customer, right? What does that actually mean? So this is what I want to sort of round out on, because Chris, I'll come to you on this, because when I speak to really good contingent recruiters who've been successful, I think they do a really good job, and they do a really good levels of service, and probably do some of the things, maybe all of the things, I don't know, when it comes to a process and how recruiters work when they're on a retained basis. I don't know. But Chris, why don't you tell us about if you were to work on a contingent basis with a client, it was a really solid role in your niche, how would you position that? What's the process that you would do? Because I feel like that can look really great for contingent recruiters, and that can look really shit as well. Some people can do a really shit job where they just send CVs or whatever. But I feel like really good contingent recruiters that are committed to this, that have done a good job, they run a good process. So what does that look like for you when we think about the process?
I think it's in a similar way that people said, it's horses for courses on retained versus contingent. It's the same on contingent. So it kind of depends where we are, who are we dealing with, where are we at in the process. So if it's a client that we've wanted to work with for ages, and we've been calling them for a while, we've spoke to them a number of times, they've got partners. It's like what Lou said, if there's no need to change anything, then they won't, right? But when the need arises, we do have a process in that we typically want to first look at like what's the outcome that we're delivering. Like, why has this been a problem? Why has it been open for so long? Why haven't your existing vendors been able to deliver this project for you, or this this role? What's lacking? Like, what's the
a
actual
diagnostic, a
yeah,
discovery.
exactly. What's lacking? And then after that, we're always going to ask for a period of exclusivity. Now, if we get it, great. You know, like I said, I'm predominantly a contract biller myself, right? So if you look at a team build, if somebody asks us to deliver a specific project in tech and we've got to build a team of 4 or 5 people, I'm not going to let, you know, that there are similarities. I'm not going to let another agency or vendor put 1 or 2 people into my team build if I don't have to, because we're going to be carrying an element of risk. You know, typically they'll want to say, you know, if the project isn't delivered successfully, then there might be, you know, we might be penalized in some way, even though it's time and material. So we'll always pitch for exclusivity. If it's a customer, typically we want this from them. We need to understand what outcomes they're looking to deliver, the full details, you know, no stone left unturned. We want a pre-booked call to introduce the profiles, talk through them. We want interview slots. You must have them. You know, who are the decision makers? Are you the decision maker? If not, can the decision maker come on the call? And a pre-booked feedback call. That's the ideal scenario. Does it happen all the time? No. And sometimes you go, well, we want to work with that client, so let's see how we get on. And I think that in our world, at least on contract, is kind of the equivalent to, or as close as you can get to sort of getting paid up front, because if they won't give you that, then you're like, right, something's
time
wrong
commitment.
Here. Yeah.
So how much does that differ to typical retained process, Lou? I know it's nuanced here, but we're gonna have to be holistic. Do you know what I mean?
And you know, I speak to a lot of people, like you say, who've got really good, robust contingent model going on, and for quite a few people coming into, you know, the training, like there isn't a massive amount they need to change. Some people there is, but some people there isn't. And actually they're delivering what is essentially a retained process, but they just don't have any commitment from the client, which is dangerous, of course, risky. So typically a retained process starts with a briefing session. Yes, of course, it starts the diagnostic of is it the right model in the first place? But once that's been established, the briefing meeting, which is a definition of what they're looking for, the actual scope of the search, so the functional, behavioural competencies, what do they need someone to do, what culture fit are we looking for, the geographical parameters, the target companies, any off limits, the scope from a target company's perspective, then to agree the process of the search, the timeline, the stakeholders involved, and then to set out then the research framework. So we then systematically identify every single candidate across that geographical location or target companies that look to meet that criteria, then approach them by every means possible and have that systematic, no stone left unturned, you know, however many approaches, normally 7 to 10, and then they're out, a final. And then bring all those candidates through a competency-based assessment against the core functional behavioural competencies, and then that creates a long list of candidates which we then collectively, collaboratively shortlist. And then that shortlist is moved through to interview, and then the client then can make the decision from all the talent that's available to them, the best of the talent that's available in the market at this time. The problem with the contingent model is, or why that isn't always possible to do that on a contingent basis, is because you can't share the workings, because the client is not under contract to retain you for the position, so could take those that information and share it elsewhere. We can't hold candidates back in a contingent process because somebody else might spec a CV in. So as soon as we're aware of a candidate that's right, we've got to send them over. We can't wait until we've got the rest of the candidates ready to move to interview. So we can't move them all to interview at the same time. And so we can't apply it's similar, but we can't apply the same process as we would be able to on a retained basis.
Okay. And then what's, because I think this is the thing that sometimes when I speak to people, like, besides, we all know what's in it for the recruiters, right? Working that way. What's in it for that client? Like what's in it for them? If I work with Chris and he gets me the end result that I want, the team that he gets them in the seat,
Yeah.
you get me the same end outcome, but I've had to part with cash to start that process. Like
Yeah.
what's actually in it for the client?
So it's confidence in knowing that they've reached the best result that's available to them.
Okay.
Like on a contingent basis, it's very difficult to know that because you haven't seen the workings. You don't know who's been identified, who's been assessed. You don't know what they've been assessed against. There isn't normally a rigorous assessment process. I haven't seen candidates against each other often because I'm interviewing them as they're being sent through. So it's a bit like the analogy that I found most helpful was like I go to book a holiday with a travel agent and she understands what I'm looking for, beach, kids club, all the rest of it. I go away. She then sends me a hotel after a few days and another one after a few days. And I'm having to make a decision on something when I don't know what else is available. So a client on a contingent basis is making a hire not knowing whether there could have been something else and if they're okay with that, I say, that's fine. And if it's okay that they might not reach a result, then that's okay too. Contingent model would be okay. But if what they want is to know without a shadow of a doubt that they're reaching the best result in a fixed time frame that is available to them in the market at this time, then there's no other way to do it.
That's interesting that because I do feel like some good contingent recruiters will probably deliver some of that.
Possibly, yes.
So if that's what you're saying,
yeah,
so it's the client knowing in detail, without shadow of a doubt, they've got the best person available.
But that one thing I would say, yeah, and sometimes that is the case. The one thing I would say about a contingent model is it's very difficult to allow the client to make a decision based on all of the information. So normally in a contingent process, they're having to make decisions on candidates not without all of the information. So they're seeing one candidate, interviewing them, and then needing to decide whether to hire them, not knowing whether there's going to be any more. Or then they'll see a second candidate and then a third and still not know, is there anything else? Sometimes they will. And sometimes we get people in the program that go, yeah, I'm doing all of those things already, in which case, at the moment, you're doing it totally at risk.
But that's then what's in it for then the recruiter's at risk, right? The client's not. That's the thing.
Well, and this is where it comes into converting clients is different depending on the service that you're delivering. So in that situation, what's in it for the client is this person continuing to deliver. Because what we tend to find in that situation is it's not commercially viable for the recruiter because they're putting all that time and effort in, and quite often they're working really hard on stuff and it's not resulting in a fee. If they are the recruiter, this is getting what they want when they want it and it's an enjoyable process, stick with the contingent model. Absolutely, carry on doing it. But what we find is they're putting all of that process in, they're delivering an excellent service, and the client's going, I really appreciate your time and thought on that. But actually we've decided to change our mind, we're going to do this. And so their fill rates are only 50% where they should be 95, 100. And if they had financial commitment, they would be 95, 100. But it's the client's benefit to do it because that recruiter will then continue to provide a service because it's commercially viable. So I'd say to that client, look, are you happy with the service I'm delivering? They say, yes, it's brilliant, keep doing it. I say, I would like to, but I've got a problem. I'm at risk here. And commercially, it's not sustainable for me because the last 6 months has been 3 projects I've worked on that you've canned and I'm high and dry. And that doesn't make commercial sense. So I'm not changing the pricing model. I'm not changing anything at all. But I do need some kind of security in order to be able to carry on delivering the service that you've become accustomed to. See what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, when you mentioned about, you using a holiday example, right? So you get everything at once. I guess what it comes down to is the client at the point that you are fully retained is relying on your network in the same way that I guess a great contingent recruiter is selling on their network, right? So, you say they've seen everybody that's possible at once. What do you do in a scenario whereby we've had it, right, where somebody's been retained and maybe they haven't delivered, and then we've sent in a contingent profile that hasn't been introduced, and then they say, right, well, we are retained. We didn't want that. They didn't want us to send it, but we've sent it. Maybe it's anonymized, and it's a grade A candidate. and they want to engage with that candidate, what are you doing in that scenario? I guess, do you then say, if they say, look, sorry, we're retained with you, we didn't ask for this profile, are you then going to say, right, well, we'll stop the search, we'll keep what we've charged you at this point, and then you take the other candidate? Or have you got something in your terms that says that even if another agency sends something in and they go outside, that it has to be via yourself? Or like, how are you navigating that?
So, question. There's two things. Firstly, if it's unusual, if there's a proper retained process been put in place and someone's doing an exhaustive piece of work on it, then there won't be grade A candidates that get missed. That doesn't happen.
I guess you're banking on your people then, yeah? You're rooting for your
it's
people.
not. Yeah, people, but also process. Like, this is a systematic identification of all of the target companies, of all of the target individuals, a systematic approach. And yes, you need good people to deliver that, but you also need rigorous process to make sure that you don't miss anything. And that's a collaborative effort with the client, by the way. So it's not that we go out and do it and then we go, all right, here's your shortlist. It's every week it's shared with them, right? Here are the target companies. These are all the individuals who've identified. These are all the ones who've outreached. This is the next phase of targets that we're now going to be identifying. So they see all the stones being unturned, and they're normally the ones saying, oh, have you tried this, and have you tried that, and make sure you think about this company. So it's a collaboration. This isn't just a us and them type thing. So candidates don't tend to get missed in the same way that they wouldn't in an executive search process. It does sometimes happen though, which is why it's important that we don't just want a third of the fee. We want the whole lot. We're not in it for the first third, right? There's no profit in that. So we have to make sure we reach a result when we're working on a retained basis. So we have to cover every single, but we also need to protect the fact that we've committed to making that happen. So if someone else specs a CV in, they can't just go, oh, stop now, I'm going to take this candidate. Or, oh, our internal team have found someone, we're going to go down that route now. In the terms, this is our mandate to complete. And if they choose to hire the position by any other way, then a cancellation fee, termination fee, whatever you want to call it, is payable, which would be equivalent to wherever we are in the search. So outstanding fees remain payable.
That makes sense, because I had another question where I was going to say, if you guys have taken something on, and let's say at the time it's in your niche, you're happy with the salary, it's up your street, and you're like, right, we're going to deliver this.
Yeah.
And for some reason, maybe it's not a delivery issue on your side. Let's say you are delivering what you believe to be match fit, top tier professionals for this job, and they're just not hiring them. They're interviewing them and they say, no. At what point do you say, well, we've done all we can, and do you encourage to charge the full fee for that?
Well, firstly, we wouldn't be feeding candidates through and putting them in a position where they're having to make a decision without knowing what else is available. It's a bit like that travel agent, right? If she instead then go away, come back in 2 weeks and I'll sit you down, I'll show you all the hotels that match your criteria and you can choose one. If I decide not to go on holiday, fine, no problem. I don't have to go on holiday, but I've asked her to do a job and she's done it. But we put them in a position where they can make that decision. Our job isn't to force them to make a hire. If they don't want to hire from what's available, then that's okay. We can only bring them what the best of the market has and make sure our process is rigorous. So if at the end of that, we get to, we've collaboratively shortlisted from the long list and they've decided, right, we're going to interview these 3 people. They interview them and they go, we don't like any of them. We say, okay, no problem. That's your choice. This is the best that are available to you in the market at this time. If you don't want to hire any of them, then that's okay. Do you want some support in deciding what to do instead? Do you want to look at a contractor to coach somebody internally into this position? Do you want to look at an interim solution? Do you want to look at a contracted outsourced firm? I can help you in touch with people. How else can we help you solve this challenge? We can't manufacture people.
So I guess it ultimately comes down to relationships and trust, right? They're trusting that you, because we can all say, listen, I'm the first one to say, if it's in our niche, we'll deliver on it, right? Have we been beat before? Yeah. Like it I don't like to say that on a live recording, but have we been beat in our niche before? Yeah, and it probably stings a little bit. So I guess that there's trust in the client, they're trusting in you and you're trusting your people, that no one's being missed then, I guess.
It is process. It's process and capability, isn't it? If we've demonstrated a track record of being able to do this for their peers and competitors, and we've got a demonstrable track record of that so that it can be tested, referenced, and we've got a process that's rigorous, that is going to collaboratively identify all of these targets, approach all of these candidates, and they can test our process of assessment and rigor of approaches, and making sure that we've identified all of these candidates within the parameters of the search, and that we can assess them appropriately. Well, what more could we possibly do? That's all we can humanly do. We can't humanly, we're not capable of doing any more than that. But if our job isn't to produce magic, make magic, or produce rabbits out of hats, or manufacture people. We can only be the best placed person to take a thorough brief, to understand that brief, to line it up with what does exist in the market, to systematically identify all those options, to approach them all, and to bring all the options to the table that's humanly possible for them to decide.
Yeah.
We can't do any more than that.
That makes sense. And my last question was, if somebody's listening, right, and let's say they've been contingent perm, right? Because obviously, like I said, we're not an out-and-out perm business, but let's somebody's listening there, an out-and-out perm business, and they've got a portfolio of clients that are predominantly contingent, and they're like, right, love that, Lou, I'm going to sign up, do my training, we're retained from here on. What are you encouraging them to do with their existing client portfolio? Would you encourage them to then go and try and convert them to retained? I mean, I guess that's the end goal, but do you see what I mean? Because there'll be different people on a different journey. Some people will be starting out like, right, we'll just do retained. Other people have been retained and will learn stuff. But other people might be like, right, I'm a contingent perm business, love that, want to go retained. Like, would you be encouraging them to go and convince their existing client portfolio to now go fully retained?
It's case by case scenario. So what my rule of thumb for that is, if it's working, as Hish says, like if there's a guy working contingently, he's loving it, it's working for him, it's working for his clients, fucking carry on doing it. Like, you shouldn't try and fix something that isn't broken. If it's not working for you, or it's not working for your clients, then there's a solution to be had. So that's what I would say. If we've got a current client that's working well, we're happy with it, leave it as it is. Don't mess with it. Like, it's making money, everyone's happy. If either we're having a hard time trying to deliver against it, or they're not getting the results they want and they keep banging on the door going, we need more CVs, then there's a problem to solve, and in which case quite often the retained model will solve it. So those situations we start looking out for with our incumbent clients, and there's the opportunity to start converting them.
From what you've seen though, because I've had a lot of the conversations with Chris Archer, so it's a really good question. I'll be honest, a lot of the conversations that I've had, I bet you'll have a better lens on this, Lou, probably, is a lot of recruiters I've spoken to have had more success converting net new relationships working retained versus existing. That's typically what people have said to me, but you may have a different lens on that.
So we probably get, I don't know, a win a day, maybe a couple of wins a day, in the community. And it's a real mix. I'd probably say 50-50. Yeah, some are saying, just converted my biggest existing client, and some are like, oh my God, I never knew I could win a retained with a new client who never even has known me before. Mm-hmm. There's just different challenges to overcome with incumbent suppliers that have got a perception of how you should work with them, and new ones that don't know you. Yeah,
fair.
Yeah.
Have we got time for just a couple of quick fire then, or no? Is that right?
Yeah, go on, quick fire, a couple of quick fire ones, yeah.
Okay. Lou, I'll come to you on this.
Okay.
Let's say both of you, but I'll start with you, Lou. So let's say you both lost your top 3 clients tomorrow, biggest spenders. Which model helps you get back faster?
Chris, do you want to go first, or
For me, for us, it would probably be contingent, because most of our revenue comes from contract. But if we were a sole perm business, then I would say retained, right? Because it's cash. Cash is king.
Yeah, I go retained every time. Not just because it enables me to focus on the stuff which is revenue generating and I'm not spending time on stuff that doesn't generate a fee, but it also enables me to do what is most important in any market for business development, which is solve problems. And so that's what I'm always looking to do. The retained model solves problems that the contingent model doesn't. And that's what I like doing because that elevates my relationship with clients. So I just go around looking for problems. And that would be my fastest route to market.
And then, Lou, I'm going to come to you on this as well, the retain piece. I'm just interested because I had a lot of these conversations. How do you feel about people positioning retained as the cheaper option because they're getting more commitment? I hear this a lot.
Not
so
good.
Chris, we can work together. Contingent, it's going to be 25%, mate. But if we work retain, my friend, you've got to give me some financial commitment, but it's going to be 20%. Which one?
I don't feel good about it at all, and I haven't had a good experience of it for two reasons. Firstly, it's very quickly unprofitable if you start reducing below contingent fees, because you do need to put rigor around it. Often these are positions that are quite difficult, and the contingent model hasn't worked, so we've got to put even more time into them. And that, especially if you haven't got proper processing, means they can go on and on and on and on and on, and then you're hemorrhaging profit and you're in a whole world of problems, which is a whole nother topic I could talk about all day on. But secondly, the perception of the value of it's not good either. If you sell something cheaper to someone, they then aren't even as invested in it. So the perception of their commitment to that process is lower. So, we went through a phase of selling, teaching, coaching, very, very, very low price because we thought we'll go high volume and that will, be an interesting way of doing it. People just weren't even doing it. So like, what's happened here? This is like a very high value program, but you're not doing it. And it's just because it's not high value because I only paid this much for it. Do you know what I mean? So it's partly that you've got to get the buy-in from the other side and the perceived value as well as the actual ability to be able to commercially deliver it.
Yeah. It's an interesting insight because I hear that a lot. I'm sure you see that a lot in terms of like how it's positioned.
People just see it differently. If you make it cheaper, they see it differently. The commitment to it's different, the perception of it's different, and it's not commercially viable. So there's two reasons why. So don't ever make it cheaper.
Comes across a bit desperate sometimes as well, doesn't it? I think if you
have to sell retained by making it cheaper, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, fair. You've heard it from Lou herself. Okay, so let's end on this then. Chris, I'll come to you first. If someone is listening, they're trying to decide from what you've learned here today, conversation, but if someone's listening, they're trying to decide which model to build in their business around or like to really double down on, like what's your best advice around this from your perspective?
I think if you're an out-and-out perm recruiter or business, retained, but approach it with an open mind. Like, I'm Irish, so we'll never leave money on the table.
Okay. So prepared to be flexible, but okay. Fair. Nice. Lou, what's your 2 pence on that?
What's the question again, Hish?
So someone's listening, they're trying to really decide which model to build their business around or double down on. Like, what's your best advice to sort of decide?
If you like the contingent model, if you like having the freedom to, bet, basically, put some effort into that and hope that something sticks, and you like the thrill of, oh, cool, I didn't expect that to come in, but it has, and you like that kind of, some people like that hustle, they like that pace, they don't like being committed, they don't like being committed to rigor or process, then the contingent model is probably more suitable for you. If you like committing and working in partnership with clients and making sure we're reaching the best result every single time, then the retain models would be my advice.
Nice. So look, to sort of round this out then, I think what I've really enjoyed here, and just to offer my 2 pence, I think from my conversations day to day in this industry, I think sometimes what can happen, Lou, you may disagree with this, but sometimes I feel like people can sort of look down their nose on like, oh, how can you not work retained? Like I only work retained and all these things, right? But I think what's really clear here is there isn't one size fits all. And I think there's a lot of exceptional people out there that really care about the service they provide, doing a really good job for their clients, candidates that work on a contingent basis or work on a retained basis. I think there is a lot of crossover is sort of what I believe. I think it does sort of boil down to at the end of the day, does the client that you're working with have problems that you can actually generally fix? And is the contingent model working? Is it not working? But ultimately, I don't think there's one size fits all, right? And I think you've got to figure that out. But I definitely don't feel like it's like one is better than the other, or like one looks down on the other. And I feel like sometimes it's positioned in that way. I think anyway, from my conversations. But I think it really is out. There isn't one size that fits all. And I think, hearing you, Lou, speak, and same you, Chris, like what's clear is like you're committed to understanding what the clients need, what the issues are, and then you can figure out what's the best way to work with them, what's the best service. Yeah. And at the end of the day, if you're committed to that, then you're going to go far in recruitment, and if you care about that. So I think that's what really matters at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you, Hishem. You've been listening to the Retained Show. Hishem Azzouz, Chris Moylan, and me, Louise Archer. Thank you so much, guys. That was fantastic. See you soon, folks. Well, that's another episode of Retrained Search, the podcast in the bag. Thanks for listening to our wild tales, LinkedIn controversies, and our top tips on how to sell and deliver retained search. Get involved in our next episode. Send in your questions and share your experiences with us by emailing podcast@retrainedsearch.com. And don't be shy. Connect with us on LinkedIn and come and say hi. We don't bite. Unless you're a Shrek firm, that is. We want to say a special thank you to our retrained members for sharing what's working for them right now and innovating new ways to grow and evolve. It's an incredible community. If you're wondering what exactly we mean when we mention our communities, well, we have two separate programs. Our Search Foundations program is for recruiters who want to learn how to sell and deliver retained search solutions consistently. And we have our Search Mastery program. That's for business leaders or owners already at 50% retained or more and looking to scale and grow and structure their search firm. We cap memberships to these programs to protect the integrity of the community. If you want access, just talk to us. Okay, thanks for listening. We'll be back very soon with another episode of Retrained Search, the podcast.